Hello, my friends. So, today I want to do my best at addressing a certain question that Dr. Deep State brought up in his last video on democracy. Because I think he asked a really good question. And that question is, what happens to a human mind when the sovereign power in a society is no longer held by some individual or some established institution like the crown or the church? What happens to our mindset, our whole perspective on the world when sovereign power is essentially sublimated into the population as a whole, such that we now believe under, and this is what happens in democracy, is sovereign power is sublimated to the population as a whole. So we begin to perceive, this is obviously not how it works in reality, but the average citizen begins to perceive that law, moral codes, and the power over life and death is now in the hands of the population as a whole. So it shifts from being held by a single authority like the king or a visible group like the church. The authority under a democracy, the sovereign power, becomes, in our minds, equated with the will of the population as a whole. So what does this do? What does this do to us? I think that the reason that the pressure to conform is the strongest under a democracy, much stronger than under a monarchy or even under like a totalitarian theocracy, or as totalitarian as a theocracy could possibly be. The reason why democracy or a democratic state produces citizens that are so conforming to what is perceived as the norm is that those who do not conform experience a sense of alienation that is unmatched in any other political system. And I think it's that alienation, that sense of alienation, that makes the democratic control mechanism so powerful. Because imagine we're under some kind of autocratic government where there's a king or a small group of oligarchs that are passing laws. And we decide we don't agree with those laws, or we feel we're oppressed by those laws. If we revolt against those laws, we become alienated from that institution alone, or that political power, the king, the church, whatever. We become alienated from them because we can see that power is flowing from them, and that the laws, in turn, also flow from them. But in a democratic society, if the illusion is done right, and the illusion has to be done right, but if the illusion is done properly, then what the sense that a democratic citizen feels if they are in direct opposition to the laws that are being passed by the democratic government, the sorts of values, the sorts of morality that is being legislated by that government, then no longer do they just feel alienation from the state. They feel a sense of alienation from the population as a whole, even the species as a whole, rather than just the institution. Because the institution... Here comes an ambulance. Oh, they're turning. Because if the illusion of a democracy is done right, then the institution becomes synonymous with the population as a whole, or at least the majority of the population as a whole. So it's no longer alienation from one or another institution or one or another faction in society. It's alienation from the majority of society and their power structures, which, once again, if the illusion is done right, the power structures are perceived as direct outgrowths of the will of the population. And I feel like I'm just repeating myself, but it's a lot easier to revolt against the will of a sovereign king, church, organization, than it is to rebel against the will of the population as a whole. So, this illusion makes it very, very difficult to revolt. And it is important that we are 100% clear about the fact that it's an illusion, that the concept of public opinion, the concept of public will, or the will of the people, quote, the people, is an illusion, a very powerful illusion. And if you have enough resources, if you have enough wealth, and if you're smart enough about it, like our elite class is, then they recognize that if the conditions are properly arranged, if, for instance, mass media is properly distributed and controlled, and you can create the illusion of this public opinion, the will of the people, then by doing that, from behind the scenes, you have total control over the population. Total control, more control than could ever be had by setting yourself up as a forceful autocrat or a forceful, king. You have far more control by controlling what is perceived to be public opinion, what is perceived to be majority opinion. And so if they have the techniques, they have the technology to do that, which they do. I mean, you can look up like propaganda by I think it's Edward Bernays. Tons of work has been done on the science of like manufacturing consent with Noam Chomsky, or just controlling public opinion, or even just fabricating public opinion. They can completely fabricate consensus. And if you can fabricate consensus, and once again, if you do the illusion right, then it's almost impossible to revolt against, because revolting against it alienates you, or gives you the sense of alienation, not just from the institution, but from your peers, from society as a whole, from everyone around you, and from the power that they enjoy as a majority. It makes you feel powerless. But once again, keep in mind, that's all an illusion. Thank you for watching.